The dust hung heavy in the air as John, Reaper, Lawson was dragged through the gates of the Zyphron arena. The crowd's roar crashed into him like a tidal wave, but he paid it no mind. His senses were dulled by years of fighting, his body a stiff shell that had long since grown numb to the brutality of the galaxy. The guards at either side yanked on his arms, half supporting, half pushing him forward, their laughter echoing in his ears. "Look at this old relic," one of them sneered, kicking dirt toward John's face. "You sure you still got what it takes, Gramps?" John's eyes didn't flinch. His gaze remained fixed ahead, the hard gaze of someone who had seen too much to care about cheap taunts. He had fought in countless wars, watched entire planets burn, and had survived battles that would have broken lesser men. But this was different. This was an arena. This was for sport. "Just get him inside," another guard said, more impatient now. "Valther's waiting for the show." They threw him into the center of the arena, the hot, cracked earth beneath him giving way with each heavy step. The deafening roar of the audience made his ears ring. They saw an old man, nothing more than a worn-out relic. They didn't see the call sign etched deep into his face, the one that had made entire factions tremble at the mere mention of it, Reaper. They didn't see the warrior buried beneath the wrinkles of time. But they would. John's feet dug into the dirt as he stood tall, shoulders squared. His body was aching, years of wear and tear taking their toll. A scar ran across his left cheek, a reminder of his past life. His once lustrous brown hair was now streaked with gray, and the eye patch covering his right eye gave him a look of someone who had seen enough bloodshed to fill an ocean. "Enough," John muttered under his breath, though the words barely reached his own ears over the chaos. His grip tightened on the worn hilt of the knife tucked in his belt, but his hand was steady. The gates at the far side of the arena opened, and the crowd went wild. More than a dozen figures strode in, mercenaries, gladiators, all young, full of arrogance, eager for blood. Their armor was sleek, technologically advanced, each one carrying an array of weapons designed for quick kills and flashy finishes. John knew them already. They had no idea who they were facing. "Get ready, Reaper," one of the mercenaries shouted as they raised their weapons, a smile on his face as though the old man were no more than a minor nuisance. "You're gonna regret stepping into our pit." John didn't answer. He didn't need to. His reputation had already answered for him. The first mercenary charged, a plasma spear aimed for John's throat. The crowd gasped, sensing a quick victory. But John was already in motion, his body moving with the precision of years of training. In one swift move, he sidestepped, dodging the spear, then grabbed the wrist of the charging fighter, twisting it with a bone-crunching snap. The spear fell to the ground with a hollow clatter. The mercenary howled in pain, but John didn't pause. With one fluid motion, he drove his blade into the man's abdomen, twisting it as he pulled it free. Blood spurted in a spray, the crowd going silent in shock. The first mercenary crumpled to the ground like a rag doll. The second mercenary lunged at him from behind, but John was already turning. His arm shot up, catching the would-be attacker by the throat and lifting him off his feet. With the strength of an unbroken soldier, he slammed the man into the ground, creating a crater with his head. The mercenary's body lay still. A chorus of disbelief rippled through the audience, then grew into a swell of awe and excitement. John stood over his fallen opponents, his chest heaving with exertion, but his face was stoic, as though he had just completed a routine exercise. Valther Krieg, the arena master, watched from the high balcony, his face twisted into a grin of amusement. His fingers drummed against the armrest, savoring the spectacle. "This is no ordinary old man," he muttered to his associates. "Let's see how much more he's got in him." John's movements were swift, methodical, as he disarmed a third fighter and dropped him to the ground with a vicious punch to the jaw. The young mercenary never had a chance to react. It was the same routine he had followed countless times in his career. The only difference was, now, the body felt heavier, the limbs slower, the mind clouded by years of violence. Another attacker came, a woman this time, wielding a double-bladed staff. She spun it with grace, aiming for his torso. But John wasn't interested in grace. He grabbed the staff mid-swing and twisted it from her hands. With a fluid motion, he slammed the end of the weapon into her ribs, sending her crashing to the ground. She barely made a sound as she hit the earth. The crowd was now growing restless, and Valther could see the interest fading. He leaned forward, irritated. This wasn't the fight he had planned. These mercenaries were supposed to overwhelm the old man, to give the crowd a satisfying bloodbath. But the Reaper wasn't just any man. He was more than a name. He was a living legend, and the arena hadn't seen anything like him in decades. "Give them a real show!" Valther shouted down, his voice cutting through the silence. "Release the hounds!" With that, a gate on the far side of the arena slid open, and two enormous creatures lumbered forward. They were mechanical beasts, half organic, half cybernetic, designed for destruction. They were known as the Hounds, savage predators bred for the arena. Their jaws were massive, lined with teeth like daggers, and their eyes burned with a bloodlust programmed into them. John's body tensed, his hand moving instinctively to the sidearm holstered at his waist. The creatures charged, but he was already anticipating their moves. The battle was far from over. The creatures were upon him in an instant, massive, with the power of a dozen soldiers packed into their mechanical frames. Their jaws snapped like steel traps, and their mechanical limbs moved with the precision of a predator. The crowd roared with delight, eager to see the old man struggle. John's mind was sharp despite the years and the brutality of his existence. He had seen worse than this, had fought against far deadlier enemies in his past. But these were different. These were creatures designed to kill, bred for one purpose, to tear through their prey with unrelenting force. The first hound lunged, its massive body hurtling toward John. Without thinking, John sidestepped, his body reacting on instinct as the beast's jaws barely missed him. He grabbed a nearby shard of metal from the battlefield floor, the remnants of a broken weapon, and swung it at the hound's side, embedding it deep into the exposed circuitry. The creature howled, its body jerking violently as sparks flew from the wound, but it didn't stop. It was relentless. The second hound was quicker, its claws scraping across the dirt as it advanced, its eyes burning with an insatiable hunger. John wasn't quick enough to dodge its initial charge, and the beast's claws raked across his chest, leaving a trail of blood. Pain exploded through his body, but he gritted his teeth and pressed forward. "Come on!" he muttered under his breath, his voice a gravelly whisper. The wound was deep, but not fatal. Not yet. The crowd was on the edge of their seats, screaming for the blood they had paid to see. They didn't realize that this fight wasn't just for their amusement. It was John's last chance to escape this nightmare. He rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the second hound's next strike. His hand reached for the plasma knife at his belt, but the moment his fingers wrapped around the handle, the first hound reared up again, slamming its massive form into John's side. He went flying, crashing to the ground with a grunt. His head hit the dirt, and for a moment, everything went black. But only for a moment. John's breath came in short, ragged bursts as he pushed himself up, the taste of blood on his lips. His heart pounded in his chest, but his mind remained focused. The world around him spun, but he could still hear the growls of the hounds, their metallic roars reverberating through the arena. He could still hear the crowd, but their voices were fading. All that mattered was survival. He got to his feet just as the second hound lunged again. John's body moved instinctively, sidestepping the attack, but this time, he didn't just dodge. He leapt forward, jamming the plasma knife into the creature's side. It let out a deafening screech, and for a moment, John thought he might have killed it. But it wasn't enough. The creature swiped at him, knocking him back to the ground. "Damn it!" John cursed under his breath. He needed to finish this. The hound circled, sensing his weakness. John could feel the fatigue setting in, the blood from his wounds making his movements slower, more sluggish. But he couldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. He couldn't afford to. "Get up, Reaper!" he hissed to himself, gritting his teeth. His hand found the discarded plasma spear that had once belonged to one of the mercenaries he'd fought earlier. It was still functional, the charge glowing faintly at its tip. The first hound charged again, but this time, John was ready. He didn't dodge. He stood his ground, planting the spear into the ground in front of him. As the beast lunged, he used its own momentum against it, driving the spear up into the creature's throat. The hound howled in pain as its body spasmed before finally collapsing into a heap on the ground, twitching violently. The crowd went silent. For a moment, John thought he had died with it, the pain from his own injuries blurring his vision. But when he looked down at the still form of the creature, the realization hit him. One down. One to go. He turned just in time to see the second hound coming at him, faster than before, the smell of blood in the air, its mechanical frame glowing with the hunger of the kill. John gritted his teeth, his hands still clutching the plasma spear. "Not today," he muttered. The hound pounced, and John thrust the spear forward, piercing its chest with all the strength he had left. It didn't scream. Instead, it went limp almost immediately, its glowing eyes fading to darkness. John staggered back, the blood loss taking its toll. His legs wobbled beneath him as he struggled to remain standing. His chest heaved with each painful breath. The crowd was silent, no longer cheering, but staring in stunned disbelief. Walter Krieg stood at his balcony, fuming. This wasn't the show he had planned. The crowd's reaction told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't just another blood sport. This man, this Reaper, was something else entirely. "Impressive," a voice called down from the balcony. Walter's expression darkened. "You think?" he replied, eyes narrowing. "Get him to his feet. The show's not over yet." John's legs gave out beneath him as the last hound's body hit the dust, and he collapsed to his knees. His vision blurred, his thoughts hazy, but he could still hear the echoes of Walter's commands. He wasn't done yet. A pair of guards rushed toward him, grabbing him roughly by the arms. They had no idea what they were dealing with, not yet. John's gaze shifted to the crowd one last time. They were on their feet now, murmuring among themselves, unsure of what they had just witnessed. "Give me the damn drink," he muttered to the guards, his voice barely audible. One of them grinned, mistaking his exhaustion for defeat. "What's the matter, Reaper? Had enough?" John lifted his head slowly, his single eye gleaming with something cold, something unspoken. "Not by a long shot," he said, his voice raspy but filled with the certainty of a man who had survived worse. They could drag him through the dirt, throw him into their pit, but they couldn't break him. Not yet. Not ever. The true fight had only just begun. The shadows of the arena grew longer as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a strange red light over the blood-soaked sands. John Reaper Lawson, still covered in the remnants of his last fight, stood at the edge of the pit. His body ached, his chest wound throbbing with every heartbeat. But the pain was nothing new. He had endured far worse, and he wasn't about to stop now. The crowd had fallen into an uneasy hush, still processing what they had just witnessed. The first round had been a brutal spectacle, mercenaries taken down in an instant by the old man they had all underestimated. But now, the arena was quiet. The air hummed with anticipation. Walter Krieg was watching from his balcony, his face twisted into a sneer. The old man had surprised him. The mercenaries were supposed to bring him down easily, make him a mere footnote in the ongoing blood sport. But John had turned the tables. Now, Walter wanted more than just a quick fight. He wanted a show. And there was no better way to deliver that than by sending his best mercenary into the pit. From the far side of the arena, the heavy, rhythmic steps of an approaching figure echoed across the sand. John's eyes narrowed as the figure emerged from the shadows. Grath. The man who stepped into the arena was a hulking brute, his body an amalgamation of raw muscle and cybernetic enhancements. His eyes were cold, calculating, and his jaw was set in a permanent snarl. Grath had been the undefeated champion of the arena for years, a beast who had torn through every opponent sent his way. Now, he was here to finish what the others couldn't. "You've lasted longer than I thought, old man." Grath's voice boomed across the arena. He cracked his knuckles with a sound that made the crowd murmur in anticipation. "But I'm afraid your time's up." John didn't respond. He didn't need to. He had heard it all before. His eyes stayed locked on Grath, assessing, calculating. The big man was fast, but he was predictable. That was his weakness. "Not today, Grath," John said, his voice low and rough. The crowd's excitement reached a fever pitch as Grath cracked his neck and lunged forward, his massive fists aimed at John's head. But John was already moving. The old man was deceptively quick for his age, his body flowing into motion with a grace that seemed out of place for someone so battered. Grath's first punch missed by inches, and John countered with a quick jab to the side of the mercenary's ribs. The impact was enough to make Grath grunt, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he swung again, this time with his cybernetic arm. The punch came faster than the first, but John had anticipated it. He ducked under the blow, moving with the speed of a man half his age. Grath growled in frustration, clearly underestimating the old man's abilities. "You're not gonna last much longer, Reaper," he spat. "This is where you die." John didn't waste words. He closed the distance between them in a flash, his body moving in a blur. He grabbed Grath's wrist with a vice-like grip, twisting it and using the mercenary's momentum against him. With a swift kick to the knee, he sent Grath sprawling to the ground. The crowd let out a collective gasp, but John didn't pause to savor the moment. The fight was far from over. Grath scrambled to his feet, his face twisted in rage. "You think you can take me down, old man?" he roared, his voice laced with venom. John's eyes flickered with a cold glint. He wasn't just fighting for his life. He was fighting for something deeper. Peace. Redemption. The ghosts of his past had followed him into this arena, and they wouldn't let him rest until he had finished what he started. Grath lunged again, this time aiming a series of rapid punches. John dodged the first few, his body moving like a well-oiled machine. But Grath's attacks were relentless, and the old man's body was beginning to feel the strain. A glancing blow landed against John's side, sending a jolt of pain through his body. He staggered, his footing slipping for just a second. That was all Grath needed. The mercenary grabbed John by the shoulder, throwing him to the ground with a sickening thud. The impact knocked the wind out of John's lungs, and for a moment, he lay there, disoriented. The crowd cheered, thinking this was the end. But John wasn't done. Not yet. With a growl, he pushed himself to his knees, blood dripping from his lip. His heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was clear. He wasn't just some old soldier. He was a warrior, and warriors didn't give up. Grath moved in for the kill, raising his cybernetic fist high. But this time, John was ready. As the punch came down, John rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding it. He grabbed Grath's arm as it passed, using the momentum to twist the mercenary into a painful lock. Grath howled in pain, but John's grip didn't loosen. With one swift motion, he brought his knee up, smashing it into Grath's face. The mercenary staggered back, blood pouring from his nose, his eyes wild with fury. He swung again, but John ducked under the punch, slipping behind him. In a move that took every ounce of strength John had left, he wrapped his arm around Grath's neck, locking him in a chokehold. Grath struggled, his cybernetic arm clawing at John's wrist, but it was no use. The old man's grip was iron. The crowd fell silent, the tension in the air palpable. John's voice was low, almost a whisper. "I told you. Not today!" With a final, forceful twist, John snapped Grath's neck. The arena went dead quiet. The massive mercenary collapsed to the ground, lifeless, his body twitching before falling still. John stood over him, chest heaving, his eyes scanning the stunned crowd. They had been expecting a bloodbath. Instead, they had witnessed a man, old and scarred, take down their greatest champion with the skill of a master. John didn't take a moment to savor his victory. He knew this was only the beginning. He could hear the sound of Valther's laughter echoing from the balcony above. It wasn't over yet. But for the first time in a long while, John allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. He was still alive. And he wasn't done yet. The fight was far from over. The arena was a furnace, the oppressive heat of the day still clinging to the sand, mixing with the acrid stench of blood and sweat that filled the air. John stood alone in the center, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths, his body battered and bruised. His vision blurred at the edges, but his focus never wavered. He had just defeated Grath, the undefeated champion, but the real fight was only just beginning. From the balcony, Valther Krieg's mocking voice echoed over the arena. "Impressive," he called out, the disdain clear in his tone. "But I think you're forgetting who's in charge here, old man." John's eyes flicked upward, narrowing as they settled on the figure of the arena master. Valther stood with his arms crossed, a smug grin on his face, clearly enjoying the show. John's blood boiled at the sight of the man, but he didn't speak. He didn't need to. His actions would do the talking. Valther's grin faded as he raised a hand. "You've earned your victory, Reaper," he said, the words dripping with false generosity. "But I think it's time for a real challenge. You'll face them next." The ground rumbled as the massive gate on the far side of the arena slid open with a deafening screech. Two hulking figures emerged from the shadows. They were unlike anything John had faced before. Their armor was dark and angular, with glowing red lines tracing their forms. They moved with eerie synchronicity, their helmets featureless and reflective, hiding their identities. John's heart rate quickened, but his expression remained calm. These were not mere mercenaries. They were something else. Something engineered for a singular purpose. The crowd roared in excitement, their cries echoing through the arena. The figures didn't hesitate. They marched toward John, their movements precise, calculating. "Two more," John muttered to himself, his voice barely audible. He was tired, his body screaming for rest, but he knew he couldn't afford to show weakness. The crowd wouldn't tolerate it. They expected a show, and they would get one. One of the figures raised its arm, a sleek weapon materializing from its armor. A plasma rifle, its barrel glowing ominously. The other figure followed suit, wielding a massive energy sword that crackled with raw power. John didn't waste time thinking. He reached for the plasma knife at his side, his hand steady despite the exhaustion weighing on him. He was no stranger to facing impossible odds, and this was no different. He had made it this far. He wasn't going to stop now. The first figure fired. The blast came in a flash, a streak of blinding blue light cutting through the air. John ducked just in time, the shot whizzing past him and impacting the ground behind him. The explosion sent dust and debris into the air, but John was already moving. He sprinted forward, using the momentary distraction to close the gap between himself and the first figure. The figure with the rifle reacted quickly, swinging its weapon toward him. John dodged to the side, using the momentum of his sprint to his advantage. He reached the figure in a heartbeat, his knife plunging into the gap between its armored plates. The figure staggered back, sparks flying from its chest, but it didn't fall. Instead, it swung its rifle like a club, knocking John to the ground with a heavy blow. Pain radiated through his skull as he hit the sand, his vision spinning. But there was no time to dwell on it. The second figure was already upon him, its energy sword glowing with lethal intent. John scrambled to his feet, narrowly avoiding the first slash, the air crackling with the force of the blade as it passed just inches from his face. The second figure pressed the attack, its movements fluid and unrelenting. John parried the next strike with his knife, the force of the blow making his arm tremble. He barely managed to block the third strike, the energy sword cutting through his sleeve, singeing his skin. He gritted his teeth, pushing through the pain. He couldn't let them get the better of him, not now. With a roar, the first figure charged again, its rifle aimed directly at John's chest. But John was faster. He dropped to the ground, sweeping the figure's legs out from under it, sending it crashing into the sand with a heavy thud. The rifle flew from its hands, but the figure quickly scrambled to recover, reaching for a backup weapon. John didn't give it the chance. He lunged forward, driving his knife deep into the figure's throat. The lights in its helmet flickered once before it fell silent, its body going limp in the sand. But the second figure wasn't done. It moved in with a renewed fury, its energy sword flashing like lightning. John barely managed to avoid the first slash, but the second one cut deep into his side, the blade slicing through his armor with terrifying ease. Blood poured from the wound, and John stumbled back, gasping for air. He was starting to feel the weight of his injuries, the exhaustion of constant battle gnawing at him. But he couldn't stop. Not yet. The figure pressed forward, its sword coming down for the final strike. John's mind raced, searching for a way out. And then he saw it. The plasma rifle, still lying in the sand just a few feet away. With a swift motion, he grabbed it, rolling out of the path of the incoming blade. He leveled the weapon at the figure's chest and fired. The shot rang out, and the figure's chest exploded in a burst of light. Its body spasmed for a moment before collapsing to the ground, its energy sword deactivating with a hiss. John stood over the fallen figure, panting heavily, his body covered in blood and sweat. The crowd was silent, their excitement replaced by stunned disbelief. It had been a brutal fight, but John had survived. He had proven once again that the Reaper was not to be underestimated. For a long moment, the arena remained still, the only sound the heavy thrum of John's labored breathing. Finally, the roar of the crowd erupted, a wave of applause and cheers that shook the very foundations of the arena. John didn't acknowledge them. He didn't need their approval. He had one goal now: survival. Valther's voice broke through the noise. "Well done, Reaper," he called, his tone mocking but tinged with a hint of respect. "But let's see how much longer you can keep this up." John's eyes flicked toward the balcony, locking onto Valther's smug face. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He wasn't here to please the crowd. He was here to escape. But as Valther's figure disappeared from view, John couldn't shake the feeling that his escape was still a long way off. The real challenge, it seemed, had only just begun. The arena was now a desolate wasteland. The dust, thick with the remnants of battle, hung heavy in the air, settling in every crevice and corner of the Colosseum. The crowd, once a roaring mass of fervent energy, had quieted, their excitement turning to awe. John stood at the center, his blood-slicked body trembling with exhaustion. His wounds were deep, his movements sluggish, but his resolve remained unbroken. The cold metal of the arena floor felt solid beneath his feet, grounding him in the reality of what he had just accomplished. He had slain the most dangerous warriors, defeated machines bred for destruction, and now, with Grath's death still fresh in the air, he had become the center of the arena's obsession. Yet John knew this wasn't over. Valther Krieg wouldn't be satisfied with just this. He wanted more, a spectacle that would secure his position, elevate him in the eyes of the galaxy's elite. He wanted to see John, the legendary Reaper, pushed beyond the limits of endurance, humiliated, broken, or killed. The sound of metal grinding against metal echoed from the far side of the arena. John's head snapped to the source, his instincts honed by years of battle. "Ready for your final show, Reaper?" Valther's voice rang out from the balcony, the microphone amplifying his words to every corner of the arena. His smug tone was unmistakable. From the gates, a new figure emerged, a towering giant in full combat armor, a living nightmare designed for this very moment. The crowd went silent as the man entered, his steps heavy, deliberate. The figure was more than just a man, he was a weapon, an enhancement of flesh and steel. His helmet was featureless, its faceplate sleek and polished, reflecting the dimming light of the arena. This was the endgame. The mercenary, or whatever he was, had the strength of 10 men, his frame an amalgamation of cybernetic enhancements that pulsed with a sinister energy. He wielded an oversized energy blade, the glowing edge crackling with an ominous hum. His presence alone sent a shiver through the crowd. They had witnessed countless gladiatorial matches, but this was something different. The figure raised his sword, and the arena held its breath. John's muscles tensed. His body was worn, bruised, but his mind was sharp. He could still move, just enough to survive. He had no choice but to face this final trial. Valther's voice boomed again, loud and cruel. "Meet Titan, the ultimate warrior. We'll see how long you last now, Reaper." John's grip tightened on his plasma knife. He had no delusions about the fight ahead. He knew Titan was a machine, his massive form designed to be both an executioner and a symbol of dominance. The figure in front of him was not a man, he was a force. And John wasn't sure if he could defeat him. But the old soldier knew that he could not show fear, not to the crowd, not to Valther. Not even to himself. Titan took a step forward, the ground trembling beneath his boots. His energy sword shimmered with lethal intent, and with a roar he surged forward, his blades slicing the air with the precision of a killing machine. John's body moved on instinct. He dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the first strike. The energy blade cleaved through the air where he had stood just moments before. The heat from the blade singed the hairs on his arm. But John didn't waste time looking back. He rolled to his feet, his pulse racing as the sound of Titan's steps thundered toward him. The mercenary swung again, this time from the left, his blade arcing downward with unstoppable force. John raised his plasma knife in a desperate block, the impact sending a jolt through his arm, but he held steady. The blade of the Titan's sword collided with the plasma knife, sending sparks flying. "You'll have to do better than that, Reaper," Titan growled, his voice deep and guttural, modulated by the armor's speakers. He raised his weapon for another strike, but John was already moving. He had to stay one step ahead. John twisted to the side, grabbing a shard of metal from the arena floor and flinging it at Titan's faceplate. The shard bounced off, but it gave John enough of a distraction to slip behind the giant mercenary. He darted forward, aiming for the joint in Titan's knee, but the blow was weak. The armor resisted, and the impact only slowed the giant for a second. Titan spun around, faster than John expected, and lashed out with his sword. John barely ducked in time, the blade narrowly missing his neck. He rolled under Titan's legs, pushing himself up with a grunt, and backed away to reassess. His thoughts raced. He needed a way to outsmart this machine. Titan's strength was his greatest advantage, but it was also his flaw. His movements were predictable, mechanical. If John could find the weakness in his defense, if he could exploit it, he might stand a chance. The crowd was silent now, watching with bated breath, hanging on every moment. John's breath was heavy, his pulse deafening in his ears. His body screamed for rest, but there was no time for weakness. He had to keep moving, keep fighting. Titan's next strike was slower, more deliberate. John saw the opening. As the sword came down, he ducked low and drove his plasma knife into the joint at the back of Titan's leg. The blade sank deep into the vulnerable spot, and the figure stumbled, its balance faltering. John's opportunity was fleeting. He pushed himself to his feet and dashed forward, launching himself at Titan's midsection. He grabbed the handle of the energy sword, pulling it down to the ground. The force of the impact threw Titan off balance completely, and the giant staggered, giving John the opening he needed. With one last surge of energy, John twisted, pulling the energy sword from Titan's hands, and jammed it into the gap in the Titan's armor, right at his chest. The blade flared to life, cutting through the metal like butter, and with a final scream, Titan's body fell to the ground. For a long moment, there was silence. John stood over the massive mercenary, panting heavily, his chest heaving. His limbs were sore, his body battered, but he was still standing. The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers deafening, but John didn't hear them. He wasn't listening. His gaze was fixed on the lifeless form of Titan. Valther's voice rang through the arena again, this time with a tremor of frustration. "Impossible," he muttered, but his words were lost in the overwhelming roar of the crowd. John's eyes flicked to the balcony, where Valther stood. His face was twisted in disbelief, and John couldn't help the small smirk that tugged at his lips. But there was no time for pride. The fight was over, but the war, the reason he was here, still loomed over him. The real battle, the one against everything that had brought him to this moment, was only just beginning. John walked slowly toward the gate. Each step was a reminder of the cost, the pain, the losses. But there was one thing he knew for certain: he had survived. He had fought for his life, and he had won. The Reaper was not dead. Not yet.